What we've heard from the candidates would be how they would like to fix the economy. But where do we actually stand? New data this morning is not providing much clarity on the econ front. We had Philly Fed manufacturing blowing estimates out of the water in a positive way, but weekly jobless claims were much worse. And maybe that was a Texas hurricane effect and maybe not. Here to make sense of it all is Tom Porcelli. He's chief U.S. economist at PGIM. Tom, good to see you. Where would you draw our attention to in terms of the developing macro picture?
Yeah. Hey, Kelly. Good to be with you, as always. Look, I think you're quite right with jobless claims. I don't know that I'd make too much of it. I do think that, we saw Texas as an outlier, which we think was impacted by the hurricanes. The thing I would say, though, about claims at a high level is, look, I think hopefully most people appreciate it really only captures one side of the labor equation. That's the firing side. And sure, we know firings have been pretty muted of late, but what we also know is that on the other side of the equation, hiring has actually slowed down quite a bit. I mean, we look at something called cyclical hiring, which is basically private jobs less healthcare. And when you look at that, the slowdown is pretty notable. I mean, over the last few months, we're averaging 50,000 jobs. If you think back last year at the same time, you were averaging about 150,000 jobs, right? So the labor backdrop, as we've been saying, and the backdrop at large, is starting to show some cracks. Now, I don't think it necessarily means recession is upon us. But if there's a skew on that, I think the skew is leaning in that direction.
There are some out of consensus voices, though, on the bullish side, like Larry Lindsay, who says, look, the Fed has to be careful here. Real wages have helped retail sales do better in the last couple of months. Better retail sales could mean better economy and jobs in the months to come. And if the Fed cuts in September and they're wrong about slowing economy and maybe even about inflation, that could end up looking politically compromised, for instance. Do you think a September rate cut is really a sure thing?
I think that it is. If you look at the market right now, the market is basically 100% priced for a September cut. So I think, and I'm sympathetic to some of that thesis. But what I would say is policy was calibrated for inflation that was meaningfully higher than it is right now. I think the inflation story from our perspective, I don't think it's something that the Fed needs to worry about anymore. They're going to say the right things about that, obviously, and that, they want to make sure it's still moving in the right direction. But I think we're already there. So I think in the context of where you were calibrated for, say a year ago with inflation, you're now almost, sort of back to target. If you just strip out shelter from, say, like headline prices or from core prices, you're there. You're at 2%. And so I think that's what this is. I mean, and again, I think it's a really important idea. This is about calibrating policy for the fact that labor has slowed down a bit, per my comment earlier, that inflation is now has rolled over from the highs. And so this is a march toward neutral. I don't think this is a march toward the Fed putting sort of an aggressive policy easing stance in place.
We haven't seen a cycle like that since, 1996? When was the last time that well, no, I guess you could argue that what we saw maybe in the late 2010s was kind of efforts to move rates here and there, move a little bit higher, but then they had to reverse course and so on and so forth. We're used to these kind of clear cycles. There's a hiking cycle, there's a cutting cycle. This time, is a little bit less like that.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of, I think the classic example that we've been using is sort of the 94, 95 window where the Fed was just sort of calibrating policy in real time. I mean, we could sort of see a dynamic like that. But again, I would stress, most people, I think, people hear, the Fed is going to cut. That conjures these images of, the Fed funds getting down to 1% or even zero, right, over the last couple of easing cycles. But classically, that's an atypical outcome. I mean, the Fed reserves that for dramatic events, the GFC, the pandemic. So I think from that perspective, it's probably smart to recalibrate the thought process. I mean, the higher for longer thing, depending how you want to define higher for longer, I would say it's normal for longer. I mean, I don't think that 10-year yields have to move meaningfully from here in the context of what we're thinking about the Fed.
All right. And there they are at 418. For now, Tom, thanks very much. Appreciate your time.